Welcome to Needle Stack. I'm one of your two hosts today. My name is AJ Nash. I'm a career intelligence professional, been in the intelligence community for about 19 years. I've been in the private sector now for about 9 years. I'm passionate about intelligence-driven security and building intelligence-driven security programs. My background's counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, fighting war criminals and all sorts of things like that. But in the private sector now, I help companies build and mature their intel programs. Run a podcast on the side and get to do this with my co-host, Robert. Robert, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Robert from OC. I'm a CISSP. I've been in the space for over 20 years, written 2 books, and I host my own podcast as well. So excited to be here today. We actually have a guest this time.
Yeah, we do. Virgil Capollari. Now, Virgil's an old friend of mine, and anybody who's seen my podcast, Virgil was already on it once. We go back ways. In the Air Force days, Virgil was a good old school intel guy and a counter intel guy and an insider threat guy. Virgil, you want to tell people where you've been and what you do?
Actually, I thought you were doing a pretty good job. But my name is Virgil Capollari. I lead a small consultancy, Adaptive Risk Strategies. With it, I bring over 20 years of government experience in the intelligence community. I've worked a variety of assignments and positions, spent a good portion of my career either translating, trying to recruit bad people, steal information from other places, and then spent the last, I'd say more than half of it, trying to find those other Virgils out there, track them down, identify them, disrupt them or stop them or slow them down.
Are you saying there's more than one Virgil Capollari out there?
You know what? And I'm going to use the word fortunately very loosely.
As I said, Virgil and I go back a ways. So I doubt there's more than one of you, but I wish there was. You're a pretty awesome guy to work with and a bright fellow. And I'm excited you're here today. I'm really looking forward to a cool conversation with you and Robert. And we're going to talk about counterintelligence and all the things that you do in that space and help educate some folks, including myself, on the industry. So what do we got first, Robert? What are we thinking?
You're both from the intelligence space. We kind of understand what that is. But when we talk about counterintelligence, what are we talking about?
The ideas, methodologies, methods used to identify, disrupt, exploit potential and actual threats, right? So if you think about security as being a traditional rifle or a cannon mount that's posted on a hill trying to stop or deter someone or an entity, counterintel is basically trying to help steer that. Maybe you want to point it in this direction because this is where we think the likelihood of something bad may be happening, and we kind of give security the real backing to kind of make the most informed decision.
So is counterintel, the way you're describing it, is that intel that's specifically focused, like obviously I'm an intel guy too. We grew up doing this stuff,
Sure.
And collections and bad guys, whatever. But a lot of what we did, in my career at least, was figuring out what bad guys were doing, collecting that, analyzing it, translating it, writing reports and saying, here's where bad guys are, here's what they're thinking, et cetera. What's the difference between that and what you're talking about with counterintel? Is it deceiving? How is it different from the traditional intel we're talking about?
Traditional intel is trying to gather what exactly the intentions and capabilities of our adversaries are, of folks that are looking to harm us. What counterintel is looking to do is kind of disrupt their methods and how they're going about it. Now, I'm going to let you in on a really big human secret. There's only 2 ways information can get out, either through electronic means or through humans. That's the easy part. The tough part is now finding out exactly how they're doing that. And then depending on where you stand and depending on, whether it's an operation or investigation, the steps you're going to take to try to mitigate those potential exploitation points.
So in the security world, would this be the difference between offensive security and defensive security?
I think that more in the on the corporate side of the house, yes. We're trying to get an idea ahead of time as to who's trying to do what, and then try to advise our companies and organizations how best to proceed to prevent what we have from going to somewhere it shouldn't.
But you mentioned something about disrupting, and I that's where I leapt to the offensive part of it.
Okay, well, the disruption part of it is you are taking the steps to actually disrupt how they're doing what they're doing. Whether you've gained more information about how maybe your product, your intellectual property, your people are being exposed, and now you're not just going to allow that to happen. You're going to educate them. You're going to take other steps to maybe protect what you have a little better. That's really kind of disrupting what they're doing. Maybe you're going to work more closely aligned with law enforcement, maybe some other organizations to help you.
It's interesting. So it's like a lot of our intel work is about understanding adversaries, getting ahead of them, either attacking them before they attack us, or preventing them from being able to execute their missions, their attack. For instance, if we're taking like kinetic, attacks here, it sounds like what you're saying here is it's the same, but in this case, it's not the kinetic piece; it's the intelligence itself. We want to keep them from exploiting us. We're collecting on them. We want to keep them from collecting on us. So we want to keep our information from getting out. So we find out about their intelligence operations. Hey, they're planning on talking to so and so. Our boss is going to be met at a meeting, but the person meeting him or her isn't really who they say they are. But we know that now. So now we got to prepare our boss to either not go to the meeting at all or prepare them with the right talking points. So it's really, as literal as it gets, it's countering their intelligence efforts.
Yes. Think about it like a baseball game. If the regular intelligence is the offense, counterintel is really the defensive side of the house. We're going to set up these measures in place to kind of make sure that we're not going to strike out when we're up at bat. That they're going to either be forced to walk us or throw pitches right down the middle.
Got it. Okay. That's really interesting, because that's the fine line. Like, obviously I'm a career human. Well, not human. I'm a career SIGINTer, and open source guy, all source guy. I know you and I grew up in SIGINT, but then you moved into the human side, which is where most of this happens, right? Is the human component of understanding assets and turning assets or creating assets, or understanding how adversaries are performing or planning to perform their intelligence operations.
Human is going to be what? Analog? It's going to be like literally face-to-face meetings in the flesh, whereas SIGINT is going to be electronic?
For the most part, we would say yes, but we'd say that in today's day and age with texting and with other electronic means, it's still the human-to-human component. You still have a chance to kind of get a ground assessment as to the facial expressions or some other things, some other indicators that a meeting may reveal that, let's say, signals intelligence or something couldn't necessarily tell you. It's not saying one's necessarily better than the other. It's just saying that you're looking at it from multiple vantage points.
Well, you make a good point. I hadn't really thought about that. Timing has changed. Like old school, you go back 50 years, right? Human was people talking to people, meeting, dead drops, meeting at bars, whatever it might be, right? There was no texting. There was no cell phones. It was human, was people talking to people, and SIGINT was like telegraph, telephone collections, right? There wasn't much in between. Whereas now what you're talking about, human can cross into the technical space, right? At times, because you can be working a target and you're using some of these technical means, but it's not SIGINT collection because you're already targeting them. You know who you're talking to, right? Whereas SIGINT tends to be a third party collect effort. But it's interesting. I hadn't really thought about the fact there's sort of a hybrid approach to some of it now from what you're saying.
Yes, it's no longer just kind of resident, and how we react around people still hasn't changed. Whether we're more recluse behind our computers or not, it's a different story. But it is a people business, and the best, longest lasting relationships are the ones where people make an effort to kind of connect with you. We just have to be a little more wary of whether the connection has an underlying motive that's not kosher.
Interesting. That's an interesting point. So, all right, we've talked a little bit about what counterintel is, right? The difference between intel and counterintel, and sort of laid that out. So let's go a little bit deeper, man. So you're a counterintel professional. This is your life. This is what you do. Can you walk us through like what you do and really what you don't do? I think people should know that, as a counterintelligence professional. So to paraphrase Office Space, what would you say you do here?
Well, first thing is you got to take the time to educate. Educate's the most important part of what you're doing. This is who I am as a counterintelligence person. This is what I'm trying to accomplish. I find more often than not, a lot of this gets lost in the sauce and the technical piece. But what I'm trying to do, what we're all trying to do, is kind of figure out what is most important to us, and then what steps are we taking to protect it. Because what you tell me and what you do don't necessarily align. If you tell me that if this intellectual property or these sensitive financial records, if they went outside the company, it could hurt him. It's like, okay, well, then why are you letting anyone just walk back there where they have access to it? It's almost like your house. So what we're trying to do is get an idea as to what you deem most important. And not every company should be deeming everything the same way. In government industry, it's kind of simple because companies that do a lot of government work, the government tells them what's important and what they have to do. That's called so if you're meeting the minimal standard, you're doing what the government wants. But a question I often ask throughout my career is, if you didn't have government contracts, would you just let anybody come through here?
They might. Sadly, cost becomes a factor, right? I imagine there's a cost benefit analysis. What's the most important stuff? What are your crown jewels? What are the things you should be protecting? And it seems like a lot of companies struggle with that, I guess, to understand what are the most important things. And it sounds like, I don't want to speak for you, I'm going to let you jump in again, but it sounds like you're saying that that's part of what you do is help them understand, hey, these are the things that probably are most important to you. I'm sure you receive, but I imagine you coach as well, because that affects how you're going to set up your security posture around those things.
Absolutely. So we try to get an idea as to the people, the information, the equipment, the operations. Just because you have the Play-Doh, is the Play-Doh itself really the secret sauce, or is it the way it's twisted, molded, shaped? Okay, now let's step back and find out who wants this and who has access to it. Those two important questions will kind of help frame it around it. Now, and then from there, you kind of build out your counterintelligence protection plan, and you work closer with your security folks to try to get an idea as to who's concentrating on what. What we're really doing is helping individuals and organizations prioritize their resources. Because if someone tells me that everything's important, then that means nothing is important.
Yeah.
I mean, in layman's terms. So what we want to do is say, well, we think you should maybe dedicate majority of your energy to X, Y, and Z. Just because, if you think of all the bad things that could happen in the world, and at some point I remember reading that the sun, which is the largest star in our immediate, world, is supposed to burn out, but we're not living tomorrow like it's burning out.
No, I think we got some time left. I hope so, at least. I got some things to do. Like, I just bought new groceries, so I can't have the sun burn out yet, man.
So you mentioned education, and I just wanted to clarify there. It's both you as the counterintelligence analyst learning about the organization, but it's also the organization understanding what the crown jewels are and what the targets might be, and really educating themselves.
It's very much a mutual exchange. Solid counterintelligence professionals don't come in and tell someone what's most important. We have to have an understanding of how people, the processes, the equipment, the information all interact. And then it's incumbent upon, at least in my opinion, the intelligence and counterintelligence professionals to build a program and tailor it around that. Because companies and organizations still need to be able to produce what they're doing in order to exist. Therefore, I think it's outside of government, I think there's or inside government, shall I say, I think there's a limited appreciation for just what companies have to do to continue thriving and producing, because there's various trade-offs. We're only here to try to focus on what I would say is most important, and or what executive leadership wants us to know, or what they tell us. We in turn try to educate them in a way which marries up with their vision, and it's absolutely crucial and critical that this happens, because the effectiveness of the program is going to be dependent on their buy-in.
Right. So could you maybe walk us through an example of what you might do for, say, an insider threat?
So what we would do is we would kind of start with kind of discussing a basic castle analogy. The castle puts up the wall, removes the drawbridge, and hey, everybody's safe inside there, right? But more often than not, especially throughout world history and European history, many castles fell apart from within. So the problem necessarily isn't that somebody from or something from the outside is going to break down the door and steal the safe. The idea is that somebody may be inside. And now it depends on also how you utilize the words. In the government, at least in the intelligence world that I came from, many of us have. When we thought about a threat, we thought about an entity that had the capacity and means to exercise harm
and motivation, right?
Yeah,
it was like means, motivation, access, that kind of thing, right?
They could actually do it, right? And
yeah.
So therefore, usually backed by a state entity, a foreign government, so they had a few more resources at their disposal. When we talk about it more on the non-government world, I would think of more of kind of like a hybrid between a risk, somewhere between a risk achieving a threat, and we'll just say an individual or entity that could harm you. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're malicious in their intent. It just means that even by accident. So as we try to discuss the insider threat program, we're just saying that you can't really have an outside threat dynamic without an internal one. There's no kibbles without the bits. You kind of need both. And if an entity is looking to hurt you from the outside, they're probably looking at who has access to the inside and working on that dynamic. That's at least a part of my career. I didn't have to step foot in any of these organizations. Just had to wait for somebody to go inside there and then work on trying to meet them.
That makes sense. It's a lot easier to get a hold of a human being than it is to crack, the security systems, right? Especially on a harder target. I don't care how great your security is. If you treat your employees poorly, you've got a huge vulnerability, right? So, and a lot of companies do that, right? They're very good on their security, but you find out that they underpay people or they treat them poorly, and they'll vent on social media, LinkedIn, whatever it is. And I imagine that's an open door for somebody like, who wants to take advantage of them, right? Counter intel folks, some of the threats take advantage of that. And then your job, it sounds like, is to understand who those vulnerable people are and be able to understand, who might be targeting them and how to prepare to deal with that or how to prevent that. That's what I'm gathering here.
Really excellent points, AJ. I mean, things don't happen just in a vacuum. Humans are a little more complex. There's a lot of other touch points. And one of the early things or best points I try to emphasize is, as a company organization, the last thing you really want to do is contribute to creating an insider threat program or an insider threat per se. If you're going to treat people poorly or you're not going to pay attention to certain things, you shouldn't help the bad folks, because that's likely what's going to happen. Our job is not to become a better victim. It's to actually, try to stem it where we can. But it's a constantly evolving process. One of the most important foundations of it with education is basic communication. And that's kind of what I find, that companies that have high insider threats, aside from just having a really special product, they have poor communication or challenges there and challenges in education.
Do you've been doing this a while, so how do you find the companies? And by find, I mean, how does it feel to you? What's your experience been in having that messaging that, hey, there's a business use? Companies are driven a lot by metrics and business case and return on investment, et cetera. Do you have a lot of success convincing people who maybe aren't currently doing so that, hey, there's actually a business value in treating people well, in compensating them properly, but also, building an environment that's a good place to work. In the event people have to be exiting them with, with respect and dignity. Is that part of your program as well when you're teaching folks about counter intel, is to talk about the business value of being good to people? I mean, I'd like to think people would do it anyway, but a lot of times that's not part of the metrics, right? So is that part of your program as well?
It is, because if companies are going to take time to try to recruit talented individuals or kind of widen the pool of applicants. If you're spending this time and money to acquire them, the goal should be to get them to stay. And, we live in a world where, AJ, at least when we were growing up, it was very uncommon to change multiple jobs in 1 year. You worked a few years, you showed some basic loyalty, and I think that's generally been the case. These days, things are much more fluid. I've seen resumes where individuals have maybe worked 3 or 4 jobs in 2 years. And, I have to kind of step back because I don't want to make sure I'm bringing my biases. But it's just, it's something to pay attention to. So if it's an investment in people, then I say that your greatest security strength or weakness is going to be the people you have. If you're hiring the right kind of people, it's going to work out. But beyond that, I find that most companies that are receptive to the message are either trying to change their posture or they're really kind of moving along with that because they're asking that question, because they're not pushing back. I find that that companies that do take that time, it just makes everything else flow so much better. And more importantly, once again, it comes down messaging from the top. The CEO, the executive presidents can't know everything that's happening. That's not their job. It is incumbent upon us to make sure we're communicating to them in a language and situation that they can understand. So that's what I think.
So we've talked about inside the castle. Let's flip that around. What happens when the king leaves the castle? How does the counterintelligence professional approach that, where an executive is going out into the big dangerous world?
We provide foreign travel security is a very big part of it. And without having the benefit of being there and without the benefit of no longer working in the government and the intelligence community, we kind of have to rely on what we have out there based on knowledge of given locations. I mean, I guess it depends on where someone's telling me they're traveling to. However, if it's a hostile, non-friendly country, chances are they're not probably going to uphold and respect individual human rights, especially of Americans, especially of other folks. So we try to provide whatever research, OSINT, open source research. We try to provide other avenues to kind of learn more about the individuals they may be interacting with, where they're traveling, where they're staying, and taking the time to kind of educate them on X, Y, and Z. This is where you're going to be traveling to. This is what we've seen. In addition to government reporting from State Department and other channels, we advise them on steps to take, maybe what they should or should not bring with them, and show them another point. So through open source research, that's one piece of it. You're learning about where they're traveling to. From the counter piece, we provide them, this is what the open source research is on you, on what you do. This is where an adversary or someone bad is already studying you and could likely hurt you in XYZ. So this is what we recommend you do to kind of take those steps. The key point here is if that analogy of the rifle being pointed outward, it gets pointed back inward. It's a two-way street.
So that's really interesting. So if an executive is going to travel, it's to recap a little bit, but to expand. So you're not only going to do the travel report to say, hey, listen, in this country, don't bring electronics, or you can't use encryption because it's illegal, or don't use the Wi-Fi because it's unsafe, or there's protests in this neighborhood, and all the things that we do in travel, weather, traffic, the whole bit, right? But you're also, from what I'm hearing, you're going to act like an adversary, and you're going to do open source research on your protectee to be able to say, this is what you look like to the adversary. And then from there, I'm going to jump ahead here and get your confirmation. But it sounds like at that point, then thinking like the threat, you're going to say, based on this profile, these are the things we would expect a threat to do. Is that capturing it correctly?
Yes. And at the earliest stages, we communicate with them and let them know that this is how we plan to proceed. because we want to make sure they're comfortable with us. Although it's open source and research, you want to respect people's basic privacy. And I'd say 99% of the time, there's no problem. And they actually find it really interesting. And what we try to remind them is that if we're looking at this, imagine what a foreign country who may be looking to hurt you, a government, they've got even more resources, time, people to take a look at you and try to find, pressure points.
What are some of those things that when you do open source? I'm going to dig into this. I want to get a little more granular. I want to understand what are the things you're using, what are the things you're building into a profile? And then what are the steps and the kind of tools you use to go do that? I mean, we talk about open source, right? And I know you and I do this kind of stuff, but for the audience, not everybody maybe does, or maybe they're looking for some new tricks from an expert like you. What are your basic steps and strategies for that? I go to these websites, I pull these things together. These are the topics I'm trying to accomplish. These are tools I use. If you have any favorite tools or whatever, what are your thoughts on that?
Depending on the company and what skills they may offer, or what they do for a living, we take a look at. We try to get an idea from them at the early stages as to any conferences they've attended. In the past, trade shows, things like that, to maybe promote their business. We try to get an idea of what foreign businesses that they have, if any, and if they're sponsoring students from any given countries or locations on special visas. From there, we kind of wind and we kind of build our research around that. So if they're able to, kind of share some of the business partners or attempts to connect, we say, okay, if you're traveling to country Y, we notice that these entities have reached out to you. Oh, by the way, this entity also seems to have business relations with another company you're doing business with in, I don't know, Mexico or Canada. Did you know that? And then we're like, oh, we also see that you're going to be traveling to here, to this location on this date. You posted this already. We took a look at some of the other people who liked it from around the country there. What else can we gather? Okay. We also noticed that online you said that you're going to be traveling here and, your daughter's thinking about going to school here. Who knows? Maybe while you're there, you may be approached. Maybe people will be extra friendly. Who knows? We kind of build that in about them. So we take a look at their pressure points. What are your business vulnerabilities? Are you looking to expand capital? Are you getting more resumes than normal? Is business tough? And now you're becoming, you're letting the guard walls down because you have to keep your business afloat. Do they know that? So we kind of, we kind of take a look, and then the individual themselves, what do they let us know about their persona? Sometimes some of these people are really, really kind of plain and boring, for a lack of a better word.
That's great. I'm sure.
Going on.
That's what you want, right?
We want that. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sometimes, they spend more time on vacation and going to these other places. We just kind of try to, we build around what they do rather than try to offer something generic that may not touch them. It may, waste everyone's time.
So boring people are easier to secure and protect because they don't leak as much information and they don't interact with as many potentially threatening people. So boring recluses who don't spend time on the internet or social media are counter-intel professionals' dream protectees, it sounds like.
Wow, you just summed my life up in about 2 minutes.
But people aren't like that, right? I mean, especially now, most people live very out and open, and they're on social media and they're traveling and they go to these conferences and all these things. It sounds like what you're saying is every one of those movements, which are all normal business and professional and personal movements, adds more risk, adds more opportunities for adversaries, and therefore, more opportunities for you to have a deeper research project and a more complete, threat picture for them, which is really interesting to me.
The biggest challenge really is we find two extremes. When the pendulum swings one way, they're everywhere and anywhere on the internet. And then when it swings back the other way, they're not there at all. Both make me wonder what's going on here.
It is suspicious.
But, in order to accomplish that, you do need, I'd say a little more kind of secure subset. Authenticate was, from the earliest stages of government. It's always been a reliable tool. It kind of gives you that, it gives you a non-attributable kind of situation. When we say non-attrib, for the folks listening, we're talking about, IP addresses not showing up from your exact house and location, where you can do some basic research. And we all know that if it's out there on the internet, it's out there forever. So it's not being hidden. So we use various, various tool sets along that space. And just some other analytic tools along the way, other OSINT platforms. But at least for the internet, we find the one-stop shop with Authenticate works. It does what it needs to do, and it's for the person who doesn't want to think much deeper, which is me.
Well, and I get that. That's me too. Like, I've been using the tool for a long time. That's not really what the point of this show is, obviously, but it turns out conveniently that that's the case, right? I'm a huge fan of Silo. I've been using it forever because, it's simple and it works. And so I appreciate the plug for that as well. But it's good to know that.
So putting on my security hat, what you described kind of sounds like you're red teaming a company, finding some adversarial information to let them know, like, hey, if I can find this out, the bad guys can find this out. I'm kind of curious. In the government, I imagine they do this 24/7. They run these teams, these counterintelligence teams, all the time. But in the corporate world, is it something like doing a pen test where you do it on demand, or is it something that maybe companies should start to consider doing 24/7 themselves?
I would say, depending on companies, I would encourage them. I would encourage any company, any individual in the security space to get outside of their comfy zone and constantly learn about what's happening. Now, this is both a blessing and a curse. Just because something happens someplace doesn't mean it's going to necessarily happen at our place. So the danger is the commercialization aspect of threat, and now everybody's chasing down North Korean imposters acting as IT personnel. And, if your company has an in-house IT shop, then you're probably not worrying about, that side of it. It's to be aware, but I think the real point is that companies are taking kind of this red teaming approach, and they should, because once again, threat and risk do not remain static. And we've had many of these programs and security programs for years, yet we're about 1 week away from another story in the news where some company's been exploited, someone did something, and we're all coming back to the drawing table. Well, if we have all these other things, what's not working? And I say that if it becomes overly burdensome with tools and processes instead of what the mission goal is.
Do you have a preference of being an intel person or playing the counterintelligence role? It seems counterintelligence is more fun.
Yeah, I think so in the career. I do. But I do like it. It's interesting to see, sometimes you go out, you talk to people just to see what they're willing to tell you about themselves. And
funny thing is, I do that too.
I mean, it really is. I mean, and if you really want to watch it at work, you find someone who's worked sales.
Mm-hmm.
Sales constantly has to do it. Why? Because you have to interface with people. You have to figure out what they want and then try to apply it. I mean, I've taken a look at folks at salespeople that work at mid-size or mid-range autos to upper-end autos. If I got out of my truck at a Porsche dealership, the salespeople probably wouldn't even approach me because
you don't look like a Porsche owner?
I am not breathing that down payment, but but very much so. Yeah, I mean, I prefer the defensive side. There's a lot more you can do, and I know there's always an ongoing debate within the law enforcement and intel side, but I think there's a time and place for each one. I think the arrest, yeah, it's nice. It does its piece. But personally speaking, a little disruption along the way, a little steering them down a different side of the river is just as effective.
Yeah, I mean that's I think that's really interesting, right? And obviously, I'm an Intel guy, but as you said, salespeople is a good example, right? Salespeople, that's their job, is to elicit information, and that's what counterintel is, right? I grew up in sales a million years ago. My family's in sales, and it's sort of a natural thing. I go out in public, and people I know will kind of laugh at how I converse with a lot of people, and a lot of people tell me a lot of things, and sometimes I haven't told them much of anything. It's just depends on the conversation and what I'm trying to get. Sometimes I'm just very curious to learn things, and like you said, people will tell you. People love to talk about themselves, and they'll tell you all sorts of things, and you walk away and go, "Geez, I know a lot about these people now. I know they're going out of town, and for how long. I guess I also know where they live, and I got a license plate. I could probably figure out their house. I could probably rob them if I wanted to," which is a very off-putting conversation, by the way, to have with people. I realize when I say those things, I have to remind people I'm not going to, because that's how we think, right? But it's very interesting to see how much people will leak. So, listen, I know we got to wrap up. We're running out of time at this point, Verge. I really want to thank you for taking the time to come on and talk about counterintel and about the work you do. It's really fascinating, interesting work, and a challenging assignment, frankly. I can only imagine. You've talked a little bit about it, but how difficult it is to get companies to understand this, to take this seriously, and to apply these learned, these experiences that you're giving them, right? These learnings, these teachings, so that they can have less risk, right? And so threats have a harder time, getting in, because again, I don't care how good your security is, your physical security, your technology, your people are generally the easiest way in, right? So treat people well, and also listen to your counter intel folks like Virgil, so that you're better prepared to combat those things. Is there any last words? I just kind of wrapped up, and I shouldn't have, but are there any last words that you want to add, like advice, cajoling, a joke, whatever you got, man?
Yeah, one final piece to any individual out there looking to get more involved with CI or counterintelligence or build out programs. If you're operating too much in the secretive manner and you're not really communicating with your larger company or teams, you're doing yourself and the program a great disservice. The whole purpose is to communicate and get outward. I find it ironic that being in the former government space, I have to have this conversation that communication is really your key. And if you're too wrapped up in the processes, you're probably not delivering on all those points. That's just my editorializing on this. But no, really enjoyed this conversation. A lot of good stuff.
Yeah. Well, that's a great point. People, right? It's a people thing. Process is important, but people are the business. I think it's a great point to close out on. Again, Virgil, thank you very much for coming on Needle Stack. It was great to have you and Robert here and with me, and we were able to have a cool conversation that I hope people took a lot away from, and will be safer and more secure. And if you need more information, reach out to Virgil Capollari. He's easily available on LinkedIn. He's a good guy to talk to. I highly recommend chatting him up. If you can't find his contact information, find us. We'll get you connected. And I think that'll wrap it up. So that's a great episode of Needle Stack. Thanks everybody for being here. Please, follow and like and share and all the things that help us, grow this podcast, so we can keep bringing, great guests like Virgil on and share all of their experience and all their wisdom.